What is up, YouTube? Smiling in third back here after about a year and a half off of doing MMA related stuff with my UFC 143 recap and fights to make after this card. So what I'm going to be doing here is sort of giving my thoughts on recent cards, with this one being UFC 143, and just talking about where the fighters from the main card and some of the other fighters are going to go from here, and hopefully I'll be pumping out one of these every card or every major card, every pay-per-view, something like that. So first up, the main event between Nick Diaz and Carlos Condit for the UFC interim welterweight title. Personally, I thought it was a pretty good fight that didn't quite live up to the hype, but it wasn't as disappointing as a lot of people have made it out to seem. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go on YouTube or any MMA forum and you'll see plenty of people claiming that Condit was just riding his bike the entire time, etc. So where do they go from here? Obviously, I want to see Carlos Condit fight GSP. That's the next fight for him. I have no interest in seeing a rematch with Nick Diaz. I thought Condit did enough to warrant getting the victory here, and he shouldn't have to be subject to fighting Nick Diaz again. And if GSP isn't going to be ready for the unification bout sometime later this year, Condit versus the winner of Jake Ellenberger versus Diego Sanchez, which I'm assuming will be Jake Ellenberger. That would be a rematch of their fight from 2.5 years ago. Condit won by close split decision. Entertaining fight, and I'm sure Ellenberger would love to exact his revenge on Carlos Condit for that fight. So, Carlos Condit, George St. Pierre, or Jake Ellenberger. As for Condit's opponent, Nick Diaz, obviously anyone who saw his post-fight speech saw that he said he was retiring, that he didn't need this shit anymore, but I think he was just throwing a temper tantrum. So if he does, in fact, continue to fight, I would love to see him versus Josh Koscheck, because Koscheck also won on this card. More on that later. And just imagining the trash talk between those two seems like a lot of fun. Not to mention, Koscheck's a decorated wrestler, and it'd be interesting to see how Diaz does against a high-level wrestler this time around in the UFC, knowing that he struggled with him before. So Nick Diaz versus Josh Koscheck is a matchup I would love to see. Alright, next up is the heavyweight bout between Roy Nelson and Fabricio Werdum. And for anyone who saw this fight, Werdum basically just treated Roy Nelson like a punching bag in this fight. He did have his back early on in the fight. Nelson was able to get out of it, but from there, Werdum just proceeded to light Nelson up on the feet. I was a little surprised by that. I thought Werdum would definitely try to take it to the ground and work his advantage there, but Werdum he looked great in beating a veteran in Nelson who's extremely tough to put away. So as for Werdum, the fight and I think a lot of fans want to see is Werdum versus Frank Mir. Mir recently went on the record as saying he thinks Werdum has better jiu-jitsu than he does, but at the same time, I know Mir would love to go out and prove that he can beat Fabricio Werdum on the ground. And yeah, both guys have awesome jiu-jitsu games, striking that is certainly more than serviceable, and they're both nearing top contender status. I think they're both the number 4 and 5 guys in the world, obviously behind Junior Dos Santos, Cain Velasquez, and Alistair Overeem. So I think the UFC would do well to make this number 1 contender fight. And as for Roy Nelson, if you look at his career in the UFC, he's 3-3, he's had 6 fights, and his 3 wins are over Brendan Schaub, Mirko Cro Cop, Stefan Struve, all guys who have either shaky or just plain shot chins, in the case of Cro Cop. And then he's lost to Junior Dos Santos, Frank Mir, and Fabricio Werdum, who are all in the top 5. So I'd like to see him get a fight somewhere in the middle ground against somebody who's solid with a good chin, but not necessarily a top 5 guy. And I think someone like Matt Mitrione would make a lot of sense, or the winner of Chet Congo and Mark Hunt, either one of those really. Or some people have been saying Big Nog, but at this point I think Nelson puts Big Nog away pretty easily. But yeah, like I said, Matt Mitrione would be a great fight, I think, because they were both on the Ultimate Fighter 10. Obviously, Nelson won that season, but Mitrione has progressed a ton since then, and I think that would be a very entertaining scrap. Alright, next up is the welterweight fight between Josh Koscheck and Mike Pierce. Obviously a fight that Koscheck won by split decision. I thought Pierce should have won the decision by taking the first 2 rounds and Koscheck taking the third, but I'm not a judge. Koscheck won the fight. What are you going to do? As for Koscheck, I said before I'd like to see him fight Nick Diaz, if only for the trash talk leading up to the fight. And if Diaz does go on hiatus or goes into retirement, I'd like to see Josh Koscheck facing Johnny Hendricks, who obviously is just coming off his big knockout win of Koscheck's training partner John Fitch. And even though Koscheck won this fight, he did look a little bit shaky, so I don't want to see him thrown right back in the top 5. I think this fight would do well to really legitimize one of these guys as a threat at welterweight, even though we've seen Koscheck fail against the top guys before. If he keeps winning, we'll see what happens. As for Mike Pierce, he looked great. I thought he won the fight, but he did get the loss. I'd like to see him fight maybe somebody a little lower down the ladder, possibly coming off a win, someone like Mike Pyle or Charlie Brenneman. There's a lot of guys around that level at welterweight, kind of fringe top 10 guys. So there's a lot of matchups. Like I said, Brenneman or Pyle against Pierce would be fights I'd like to see. All right. Next up was the bantamweight bout between Renan Barão and Scott Jorgensen. Obviously, this fight was a unanimous decision in favor of Barão. One thing this fight proved is that Barão passed the wrestler test. He was able to stop Jorgensen from taking it to the ground, and he lit him up on the feet, even though he was never really in danger of finishing the fight. He looked good in being a top 5 guy in Scott Jorgensen. So next up for Barão, I'd like to see him fight the winner, Dominic Cruz, in Uriah Faber. I think he's ready for that title shot, especially given that Cruz has basically beaten everyone else in the division other than him and Michael McDonald, who's obviously fighting Miguel Torres next. So I think Barão's ready for the title shot. I mean, he did show some holes in his game, like he kind of gassed a little bit in the third round, which could pose some problems against Cruz, but I think he's ready for the title shot. He's done more than enough to warrant it with his last 2 wins, let alone the 27 before those. So I'd like to see Renan Barão fight for a title. As for Scott Jorgensen, I think the fight that makes the most sense for him right now is Brian Bowles. Bowles also coming off a loss to a top 5 guy in Uriah Faber back in November. And the bantamweight division is just kind of thinning out with Demetrius Johnson and Joseph Benavidez going to 125. Jorgensen, Bowles are around that number 4, number 5 guy in the division right now, and I think that would be a good fight. I think just to put in a pay-per-view main card or main card for a free card, and the winner kind of gets right back in the hunt, even though they've already both lost to Cruz and another guy in the top 5. It's a thin division. What are you gonna do? And finally, the first fight on the main card, which was the middleweight fight between Eder Herman and Clifford Starks. Herman won by rear naked choke in the second round after a pretty close first round. So as for Herman, personally, I'd like to see him get a rematch with Alan Belcher. They fought 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a close decision win for Alan Belcher, but both guys really seem to have turned a corner lately and are both sort of on the outside of the top 10 looking in. I think a win for either one would really propel them into title contention, into the top 10, and do a lot of good things for their career. As for Clifford Starks, I mean, obviously he took this fight on, I don't want to say short notice, but he didn't have a full camp for it, and for facing a veteran guy like Herman, he did look pretty good. I mean, I think a lot of people expected him to maybe just take Herman down if he was going to win the fight at all, but he connected with some punches on the feet, had Herman a little hurt at one point. But then the second round came around, Herman was able to get him down, and he was a fish out of water on his back. So next up for him was there's a lot of guys sort of in that mid tier of the middleweight division. The first name that comes to mind for me is Brad Tavares. Both guys just lost the first fight of their career to a veteran, with Tavares losing to Aaron Simpson over the summer. But there's a lot of guys around that level. Kyle Noak, Tim Crater, Tom Lawler, plenty of interesting fights to be made at middleweight. Alright, YouTube, so that is it for the main card fighters for UFC 143. In the description below, you will find some other fights I wanted to see for guys from the undercard. And if you're watching this, I highly recommend my boy CascadeSoldier. He also does the MMA preview, prediction, review thing. So I'm going to post a link to his most recent video, and I highly advise all of you to check him out. And that's it for now. Keep it real.